Here's why it's important for us to tell our story. Everybody else has done it for us for over 1,000 years, and they've gotten it wrong. And they've gotten it wrong on purpose. We're the only ones who can actually tell our story. No one else can tell anyone else's story. Two important things about being a senior, and you all should always ask this question. What do we have inside of us that no one else has? And why do they want to genocide us? Because they have been telling our story and we haven't. We have empiricism, we have wisdom, and we have a story. They don't want us to tell that story. Because once you hear your very own story, you will have your own empiricism and your own wisdom and your own story. And no one can tell that but you. No one can tell what it was like to be born or come through to this system through your mother's womb but you. No one can tell you what it was like to be on the soil but you. I know what it was like to live on my grandfather's soil. And even when I wasn't there, I know what it was like because I heard that story from my very own people. They told us what the soil was like. They told us what it was like to pick cotton. They told us stories that they now call myths. For example, I never knew that unicorns were a myth because my family talked about unicorns as if they existed. And I believe that they did. My people talked about what it was like to gather fruits and berries and come home and eat them. What it was like to eat all day from the soil and then eat biscuits for dinner. And see, people will tell you that we were poor and that we were starving. No, we ate good food. We ate good food because it came from the soil. No one can tell you about what your food is like but you. I say this all the time to my children. You don't know what water tastes like. You don't know what real food tastes like. But I do. I have that story inside me. And I also have the story of the universe inside me. That is something only Aborigine people have. We have what the United Nations call a cosmovision. No one can tell that cosmic story but you. And that time is coming now for you young ones who are rising up from the deep. You're rising up, and that story from the beginning of time is in you, and you're beginning to speak it. No one can do that but you, because no one comes through the soil but you. And that's why it's important for you to tell your story. One of the most important things about knowing my story, and many of you will find this, is that let me start with, first of all, my family came from Mississippi to the north. They were some of the first great migrationalists. And in that, the young ones, because that's what I was at the time, a young one, we didn't know much about the South. We didn't know about picking cotton. We didn't know a lot of things. But my Uncle Simpson, who was my grandmother's brother, was commissioned to come to the North every summer and remind us of who I was, or who we were, because there was a lot of us. And every summer he came to tell us, well, number one, you're Indian, and what it was like to pick cotton on my grandfather's soil, land. And he also told us a very important story. And this story was about my great-great-grandmother who lived in Mississippi. When she was a child, there was a raid. And in this raid, they killed a lot of the people in their village. And my great-great-grandmother was hidden inside of a water catchment system. But no one knew where she was, and her father couldn't find her. The Cherokee people, who we're all the same people, we're one people, many nations. The Cherokee people heard of the raid, and they crossed the Pearl River. And they crossed the Pearl River, and what they found was my great-great-grandmother. She was a little girl, and they took her back across the Pearl River, and they started to raise her. But someone found her father, and when he found out that she was on the other side of the Pearl River. He went and got her and brought her back. Now, here's why this story is important. Because of the closeness of our people, the Cherokee and the Choctaw, I'm still here. I'm still here to tell that story. And if my uncle had not told me that story, when I looked for my genealogy, all the key points of that story brought my history to life. He told us about the Pearl River. So when I looked up my mother, and my mother died when I was very, very young. But when I looked up my mother, I found that what came up: Choctaw Reservation, Pearl River, my grandfather's land came up, Hinds County, Mississippi. We had been told all these stories, so they were familiar to me. It made it easy for me to believe what I was looking at or what I had found, because it was already in my DNA. It was already inside my mind. It was already inside my heart. And I could pass that story on to my children. It's important that you go back and you find your history, so that you can tell your children. You cannot let it die. Because when I'm 72 years old, if I don't tell this story, if I don't tell this story to my children, then it dies with me. And if they don't tell it to their children, it dies with them. The most important thing my grandmother did was to make sure her brother came to the North and told us who we were, how we survived, the war against us, picking cotton. All those things were the most important things in my life. That's how I was able to document myself, because I found my story on paper. So let me leave you young ones with this, because I see you on TikTok. I see you on social media, and many of you are rising from the deep. Many of you are beginning to know who you are, or question, well, if we're from Africa, then why is it that everything in this world that everyone enjoys came from America? It came from my ancestors. So then maybe you think to yourself, I might just be home. I might be on my own soil. I might be where I can create the things that I want to create. Don't be afraid to challenge the stories that don't really connect to you. Don't be afraid to challenge someone who says, you're African. Don't be afraid to say, no, I'm American. My grandmother was American. My great-grandmother was American. And so I'm still American. Don't forget, don't be afraid to do the research. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask the ancestors. Don't be afraid to ask me and those who are like me, who are willing to help you find your genealogy. Speak your truth. Speak what the universe is giving you. Speak what your grandparents is giving you. It's in there. Don't be afraid of it. Live it. Love it. Embrace it. You are the tree of life. Don't ever forget that. All things come through you.